Hello, ladies and gents. This is Jamie Blosman, the host of the Femcanic Garage podcast. Welcome to the 5-part series of the dirty little secrets in the automotive and skilled trades industries. This blog series is brought to you by Chasidy Sisk Writing and Communication and Femcanic Garage. We have interviewed industry experts on topics related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're excited to share their knowledge and experience with all of you. Now let's get started. The discussion topic this week is assumed ignorance. Angelina Alcantar is in the hot seat today. She offers a unique perspective on assumptions related to women's intelligence and skill sets because of her time spent as a student, working in shops, and being an automotive instructor. Angelina is an ASE Master Tech and a seasoned automotive instructor at River City College in California. After earning her associate's degree, Angelina spent several years working as an auto technician in dealerships, repair facilities, and performance shops before joining the faculty at her alma mater. Get ready for some knowledge bombs from this dynamic woman. Hello, everyone, and we have Angelina in the hot seat today. This is this isn't a new rodeo for you. I've had the privilege and honor of interviewing you as well. So when Chaz and I were sitting down talking, like, who are the experts in this industry? And when we're going through these quotes, I'm like, oh my gosh, your name was one of the key people that popped up, and I've had an opportunity to meet you in person as well at SEMA. That's one of my goals, is to meet all the women that I interview in person. I had the honor and privilege of being able to do that as well. So thank you, one, for accepting our invitation to be interviewed. When we started this journey, this is something Chaz and I wanted to do, but quite honestly, we were afraid, right, of being rejected because we are talking about topics that aren't always talked about in our industry. And sometimes people don't want to talk about it. And we feel that it has to be talked about. And we weren't sure how the ladies would receive our invitations and if they would want to be a part of this, and we have been blown away with the courage and willingness to talk about these topics. So what are we talking about with you? We are talking about, it's in part 3, assumed ignorance. Now Chaz and I went back and forth on what we should name this particular week's topic, and we landed on this one. I think it warrants some clarification on what do we mean by assumed ignorance exactly. It's kind of judging a book by its cover and assuming just by who they are, their gender, their skin tone, you name it, making assumptions on if they know about something or they're knowledgeable about something. And that's really the genesis around this. So, Angelina, thank you for being with Chaz and I.
It's an honor. Thank you so much for including me in this. I definitely agree with you guys that these are things that they should be talked about. And that there should be no topic that's not okay to talk about. You know, the more brains we have around something, I think the more perspective we have, and it really allows some of the younger incoming generation coming into this field a little bit of insight. And so there's no sense in reinventing the wheel. It allows them to say, oh, okay, never really thought about that. Let me maybe approach something in a different way. And we just get better and better by doing that kind of stuff.
I agree. Said like a true expert. And, folks had a little precursor in understanding who you are and what you're about. But you're an instructor at is it technically a technical institution?
We are a community college that
Community.
has a career technical education program, and that includes automotive, welding, HVAC, all that fun stuff.
Yeah. And I see I'm cheating because I interviewed you and I know your background, but growing up, I mean, you shared with me that you you didn't know this would be the path that you were going on in being an instructor, and you kind of fell into it in some respects and fell in love with it. But what I imagine as an instructor, you see a lot of assumed ignorance. Not from you per se, but observations. Is that the case or no?
I would say that over the years that has changed. At the high school level, that was a big issue. I will also say, even from my perspective as an instructor, when I first started teaching, I was 25, fairly young and for an instructor. And so not only, was I teaching a class full of predominantly males, but I was also not too far away from their age. And so, it's presumed how is it possible that you would have anything to offer us? And so I did find myself initially having to prove myself. At the high school level, it was tough too because even though they're even younger, their 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 attitudes were a little bit less mature, of course, and so things that some people might just keep to themselves and think they don't. They just say it. And so there was a lot of kind of questioning at the beginning. But I think for me, when I go into a classroom, I don't want to go in with the attitude of, I've got something to prove here. I go in with the attitude of, I don't know everything, but I've spent a fair amount of time in industry and doing lots of different things throughout different parts of the industry. So I think I know a little bit, and I'd like to share whatever it is that I do know with my students. And I have no problem saying, you know what, I don't know, but I'm going to do some research and I'll find out for you, or we'll do it together and we'll figure this out, because nobody knows everything. But I just want to share what I do have. And I think once students realize that you really do just have their best interests in mind, I'm just here to help, I'm just here to help you be a better you and do better than I did. That's the goal, is for every one of my students to do even better than I did. There's no reason for them to have some of the same challenges that I did, because I can help you through that, right? And so I think once that message comes across, that ego goes away. They no longer see me as somebody who's trying to prove themselves, and they start to dwindle off of themselves with, well, I don't want to embarrass myself by not knowing as much as she does, because this is not a competition at all. I'm just here to share what I got, and some of it, maybe you already know, maybe you don't. And maybe we both walk away better people because of it. But I'm also here to teach them how to learn better. And, there's some little things, mistakes, silly things that I've done in industry, that I didn't know. When I first walked into a shop, and even coming out of tech school, like I didn't know what a flange was. So when people kept using this word, I'm like, yeah, flange, totally. Or like bung, that's a weird word, right? Like
It's a
what the heck is
really
that? Like,
weird word.
yeah, so
I'm pretty sure
I
I would have an immature moment every time it was used in class.
exactly. So there's these terms, even thread pitch. I didn't know that. I didn't understand thread pitch until I went into a hot rod shop, and we're dealing with a lot of custom hardware. So when I worked at the dealer, why would I need to know thread pitch? I know that Honda generally uses these size bolts. We've got them lying around all over. And so as I learned these things sort of the hard way, in the embarrassing way, like my coworkers or bosses be like, you don't know that, you don't know that, you don't know that. And
Angelina, I'm curious, and when you share that, did you observe them reacting that way to everyone at the job?
I think that throughout my time, I'd say I probably only had two bosses that negatively reacted toward me as a female in separate occasions. The other ones, the negative reaction wasn't because I was a female. That's just, they were rough with everybody. You know what I mean? And
I think that's an important distinction for a for women, for us as women, to pay attention to and ask, is this truly a gender thing, or are they that way with everyone? And that doesn't excuse it, right? But I think it puts certain things in perspective and allows you to, uh, navigate how something should be handled.
Yes, and I will definitely say different parts of the industry have different attitude sets. So, working in the hot rod industry, everybody has a roughneck attitude. Everybody talks crap to each other. Everybody, "Oh, you didn't know that?" And then it's just it everybody plays really rough, and
Is it
that
like a lot
definitely
of
had nothing to do
peacocking?
with
Like a lot of peacocking?
um it's okay, so it's going to seem like I'm going to veer off here, but I'm going to try to make a point and remember to circle back. There is data to show that young boys are rough with each other at a young age, right? They beat each other up, but then they'll help each other back up, and it creates this bond because there's no unspoken words. If I have rough feelings and I'm going to say something about you, I'm just going to say it. As to where with young girls, we don't want to hurt each other's feelings because we become empathetic very early on. And so it turns into this withholding information, and we don't get that same bond that some of the young boys do. And these are issues I think all of us are aware of as far as the types of friends or the types of friend relationships we have between the genders. And I think that working in the hot rod industry was very much like playing with young boys. And at first, it seems really rough, but then you realize there's almost this freeing relief that we don't have to be different. I don't have to be a fake person in front of you. I can tell you exactly what's on my mind. Your feelings aren't going to get hurt. You're going to tell me exactly what's on my mind or your mind, and my feelings aren't going to get hurt. And so at first, it was a transition. It was something that I wasn't used to, but once I got used to it, I was like, man, this this is kind of cool. It's kind of fun. It's there's not as much pressure. I'm not wondering what's on your mind because we just say it. And sometimes it's a little too freeing for people because then you get coworkers farting around you and stuff like that. And you just those are things you deal with.
Yeah, it and I guess just to bring it full circle around assumed ignorance, that's an interesting point that you bring that up because the roughneck, you refer to it, and just to kinda stay with that terminology, is that, assumed ignorance may be misinterpreted. It may be misinterpreted as assumed ignorance when it may just be that niche of the industry that you're in.
Right. And so I would say to anybody who's trying to navigate that, is this something that's toward me? Is it something that is just that's how they treat people? Is observation of behavior. And there are situations where I've been in where I'm like, man, are they treating me this way because I'm a woman? And then I would see them talk the same crap and be just as rough to some of my other coworkers. And so it's like, oh, okay, it's not, and that pressure is off because it's a level playing field. All right, this is just how we're treating everybody. And not saying that, it's okay to
You can
be
still
treated
set
poorly or
boundaries,
anything.
right?
You can still set boundaries, but it it allowed me to assimilate to a different, I guess you can say, work culture a little easier. And I notice it's not just at one shop. That is the whole, I would say, hot rod sort of old car restoration. That is that whole industry. As far as that type of attitude or work attitude goes, everybody is just a little more roughneck as to, working even sometimes at dealerships. It really varies from dealer to dealer, from company to and brand to brand.
I'm just curious, Angelina, you kinda touched on it a little bit, so I wanna backpedal just a moment because I wanted to, finish that particular part of the story. You mentioned how you worked with high schoolers, and when you started as a college instructor, the age gap between you and some of your students were not that great, right? And you dealt with the assumed ignorance around, hey, and it wasn't just about your gender, it sounded like your age as well, right, played a part in that. And you present, I imagine you presented younger than what you may have actually been, right? You're a beautiful young woman, and even though you're 25, without them knowing, they may think you're 20 or 21. right? And how did you handle that? I mean, you talked a little bit about it where it's about you talked about the knowledge piece, right? And how you presented and I'm not here to prove anything to you. I know some things. There's other things I don't know. But what about addressing the female aspect of it? Because I imagine you were probably hit on by students or maybe even had inappropriate things said to you.
What was really interesting is I was, again, I think maybe because of lack of filter, I was hit on quite a bit more at the high school level. Which is, what do you say when a 15-year-old boy
I
hits on
don't
you?
know. I'm sitting here
I
laughing. I'm
had mar-
like,
I had more marriage proposals than I could count. And my first year of teaching high school was very interesting to navigate. Obviously, these are not serious things. I would have never ever dated a student. Um, I think that once the transition went from the okay, we get over it, yes, okay, I'm a woman and you don't see that very often here.
well,
Okay.
hold on, Angelina. Let's just qualify that. You're so modest. Here, let me help you out. Yes, you're a woman. You are a very attractive woman that have high school boys with raging hormones, right? So I could only imagine, right? And I guess to tie this into the assumed ignorance thing, I guess the question that I'm getting to is when they walked in, I imagine, I'm trying to put my teenage boy brain on, which I'm not a boy and I'm not a teenager. But the first thing they notice about you is that you are in a teenage boy verbiage, a hot chick that is my teacher, right? And I imagine where they went didn't even, not all of them, I'm sure, but it went more towards your physical rather than your brains.
It did. And so high schoolers in general, especially high school boys, it's kind of their job to push boundaries, right? They're still trying to find out in life what's okay and what's not okay and who's going to let you do
Girls
what or
too.
say what. Yeah, no, girls too.
Yeah, I wanna
Absolutely.
my daughter, woo, she's pushing the boundaries,
Yeah.
girl.
Yeah, that's a teenager's job.
Yeah.
That's what they do, because they're putting their feelers out. They don't know. And so what I learned was that you can't make things taboo. So I came from a roughneck industry. You want to talk smack to me, boy, I can talk right back. And we can have this conversation and that might not be something if you're going to say like, oh, if you were going to give advice to another young female automotive instructor, you know, I won't it wouldn't be kosher for me to tell you, yeah, just talk smack right back to him. But in a sense, it's almost and this is horrible, but it's almost like, they talk about like going to prison. You gotta prove yourself when you first go in. It was a little bit like that. They would make jokes. I would make jokes right back. And it was a very fine line that I had to walk because obviously I am in overage, over the age of 18. And I am responsible for these young people, these classes of young people. And I could absolutely get in a lot of trouble if I say the wrong thing. But what happened was there was an environment that was created where a lot of other inappropriate things were said by my young students. And so I had to return it back with something that was a little bit more intellectually challenging, but equally as stinging. And
Had bite to
I
it.
would always come back and say, we're joking, right? We need to come back. You guys want to talk smack? I can talk smack. We can do that all day, or we can learn about cars, right? Like, and then it became a playful thing where it 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 allowed a mutual respect. And I told them from the get go, I will respect you as long as you respect me. The moment you disrespect me, we're going to have a problem, right? And obviously if things got out of hand, I'd have to send somebody to the principal's office. But I can tell you that's happened out of the 4 years I worked at the high school, that only happened one or two times. Because it was like, hey, we don't need to get to that level. You don't treat me this way and I won't treat you this way. Now let's learn some cool stuff so maybe you can get a job or maybe work on your own car one day. And I think once we got past that, and I think once the students really truly understood, like, hey, I got your back. There was a number of situations where I was helping students with homework that had nothing to do with my class. I was giving them advice in situations that had nothing to do with my class. And I think once they realize, okay, she's the real deal. She wants to help me. And in some of those kids' lives, there's not a whole lot of people trying to do that. And so I think helping teenagers navigate these waters, it's very confusing and very hard to be a teenager. And I think that was a good thing about me being 25, is it wasn't that long ago, since I was a teenager. So I know it is hard. They do have raging hormones, and they are so very dramatic, right? Like every little thing is, oh my God, it's the end of the world. And
Yes.
you let them, okay, have your fit. Now, after you've take a deep breath, take 3 deep breaths. Now let's have a conversation and talk about how this is actually going to affect your life, and let's move on. How can we do better? What can we do next? And I will tell you, I so many of the students who were problem students for their English and their math teachers, they weren't for me, because we had a mutual respect. They knew, okay, we're going to come to an adult agreement. We're going to have this conversation. If some student came to class just they slept on the wrong side of the day, or slept on the wrong side of the bed that day. I feel like I just said that wrong. They
No, I think
woke
you
up on the
got it.
wrong side of the bed.
Yeah, there we go.
Um,
Close enough.
there we go. Yeah, they come in and they just, I just get that you could see they got the destruction in their eyes. They just want to see the world burn that day. And they'd say things and they'd do things, they'd act out like a 2-year-old would do. And I'd pull them to the side, because addressing people in front of people is never the good thing to do. And I'd say, hey, what's going on? I know it has nothing to do with me. I know you lashing out at me has nothing to do with me. What's going on? Is everything okay at home? Is everything okay? Did something happen in another class? And every single time it was something going on with mom and dad. A lot of my kids, they grew up in foster homes, or their parents were drug addicts, and so they lived with their grandparents. There are lots of messed up dude. Some of my kids had situations that adults shouldn't have to go through, and yet this is a 15, 16-year-old kid having to navigate these waters. And so I think them getting to get that out, somebody listening and understanding, and here, maybe from an adult perspective, here's how you might handle the situation. Sometimes it was issues with other instructors, and so, hey, you can't fight them. You're never going to win. So let's backpedal that anger and let's talk about how you're going to play this chess game, okay? Because you winning is you passing that class. You winning is you proving that instructor wrong, even though they said something bad about you. And so I think as time went on, I built a relationship with these kids that was a lot less of the hot chick and a lot more of an aunt or an older sister that they could confide in, and learn cool stuff about cars, so they could change the oil in their own car and possibly get a job at Napa Auto Parts or something. So that it was a process. I didn't know what I was doing at the beginning, but we all learned together, and it was a great experience for me. It was a learning experience for sure, but teaching at the college, completely different. I don't get hit on. I don't get there is a barrier and a respect, I think, that students have as adults toward their instructors, and we don't cross that barrier. Whatever I don't know what they say to their friends, and whatever I say to my friends, that is separate, right? Like, so once I got to the college, that was not an issue at all. The biggest issue, I'd say, because there are students who grow up in a different culture where women don't do those things. They just don't work on cars. So I was the first female they had ever come across that was not falling in that category. And so they were very confused. There was some doubt. And I'd say, as this happened, it caused me a lot of anxiety and self-consciousness, which I didn't realize at the time, but was appearing, I was oozing low self-confidence. And when you are seeing somebody subconsciously, not consciously, you're not thinking, wow, they don't look very confident at all, but your brain sees all the body language that that person is doing. And man or woman, if I see an instructor that is oozing low self-confidence, do they really know what they're talking about? I I don't know if I'm going to believe what they say. And so I will say there was a period of time where I'd have students who I would talk about something in class and we're talking about lecture, and I'd have a student kind of challenge it, and I'd say, "Well, this is this because," and they'd say, "Are you sure?" And I got deeply offended.
Angelina, let me ask you a quick question. Let me ask you a quick question around that because I think this is very important, and they all start tying in. Like we talked to Lori about stereotypes, and Lori's amazing, a great interview with that as well. But I noticed there's these common threads that they really kind of link together, right? And there's this thing, this whole thread around self-worth, self-confidence, and, the $1,000,000 phrase for me lately is imposter syndrome, right? That challenge of imposter syndrome, and I feel like women, uh, struggle with it more than men, and it's because society as a whole doubts women in certain particularly in certain industries, and automotive and skilled trades is
Sure.
one of the top industries that if a woman walks in and is your plumber or your mechanic or your welder, you are like, I don't know, right?
Are you
And
sure?
are you sure? Right? So it's this imposed or uh, doubt, right? And it ties into assumed ignorance, right? That's what feeds it. It feeds it even more.
It's self-perpetuating, right? So if you're doubted, let's say even just once, then you're going to start to say, well, maybe they're right, right? Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I don't know as much as I thought. Maybe I'm not as good as I thought. And what starts to happen, and Bogey Latiner actually is the one who really, really helped me out with this, um, showing me the power pose, and she showed me that TED talk, and it changed my life. Because as a student would say something like, "Are you sure?" And then I started to think like, "Why would you question me? Of course I'm sure." And then I leave class and I think like, "Man, maybe I start questioning myself." And um, what I didn't realize is as my self-confidence starts to go lower, our attitudes will actually affect what our bodies do, and that includes hormone production. And so if I'm feeling very low confidence, my body is going to get smaller and smaller, and I'm going to cross my arms and I'm going to cross my legs, and I'm going to take up the least amount of space possible. And when I'm feeling really threatened, I'm going to protect the most important part of my body, which is my spinal cord going to my brain, right? And when I start to do things like this and I start to make myself small, that is going to lower testosterone production, which we know that as like the male hormone, which kind of ties into a little bit of this. We already are women and have lower testosterone anyways because we're women, but we need a little bit of that. And if that starts to drop and drop and drop and drop, my confidence is also going to drop and drop and drop, and I'm going to keep doing this, and it's going to continue to drop, and I am eventually going to wither away into this tiny little ball that crawls under a rock, right? So how do you get away from that? You need to break the cycle. And that's what Bogey was showing me with the power pose. And when she showed me the TED talk, I can't remember the name of the speaker. They talked about animals doing this, showing themselves big, making their arms big, not just to wear away predators, but that's also going to increase my testosterone production, which is going to increase my confidence. And once I'm actually confident, I am going to be bigger, and my shoulders are going to be back, my chest is out, I'm confident. I'm telling you, a matter of fact, this is how something is going to work. And if I tell somebody that way rather than, well, and so I think it's going to be this. They're going to either say that person really knows what they're talking about, or they don't seem very sure of themselves. And once I broke that cycle, so before every time I went into a lecture that I wasn't, let's say, was kind of new, I'm doing a new lesson in a new class that I've never done before. And I've done a lot of my research. I've done everything I could to be, prepared for this lecture, but I'm not feeling confident. Before that lecture, for 3 minutes, I stand with my arms all the way out, my legs sort of, I'm like making myself into a star, or you do the Wonder Woman pose, your hands on your hips, chest out, um, purposefully making yourself big, purposefully opening your chest. It's vulnerable, but doing that is going to instantly give you a boost of like, okay, let's do this. And once you get in the habit of that, and that is something I had to consciously do, because once I was aware of this behavior, I started to notice when I was doing this. I started to notice when I was shrinking, and I was like, whoa, okay, stop, Angelina. You need to, let's Wonder Woman. Let's Wonder Woman. Okay, yes. And even when I'm having a conversation with somebody that I don't necessarily feel comfortable with, let's say somebody's challenging me on something, or I'm starting to get maybe a little bit self-conscious about what we're talking about. And I can, and you, of course, you guys can understand with ADHD, and this was pre-medication, like, if I'm worried about this, I'm focusing less and less on the conversation, which makes me seem like I know less than I actually do, because now I can't remember things that I should be remembering. And so one of the things that did help is, as I'm having those types of conversations, Wonder Woman stance. Okay, yes, yes. Making sure that I'm not shrinking, making sure my chest is out, making sure that I am getting a little bit of that testosterone boost that I needed, right? And that was something that changed everything. Once I started doing this, I didn't have students asking me, "Are you sure?" anymore. So that ties back to, okay, was that gender related for me, or was that my body language? And if I'm no longer getting that, to me, that tells me that was my body language. I am getting a little older now, and maybe my bags by designer are starting to allow me some wisdom, I guess, to my crowd. But I really do think that, especially certain parts, certain cultures, yes, you're going to get that behavior because you're female. How you are going to get over that, and how you are going to help your audience get over that, right? Because they're blocking themselves from learning too. They're, that reaction's making you feel self-conscious. You're not as effective as an instructor, and your audience is blocking themselves because they think that they can't learn much from you. So if we can get over that hump, I can grow, my audience can grow, and we can get right back to doing exactly what we were supposed to be doing, which was learning and growing. So for me, that was my hurdle. That was my stepping stone, I guess, or my chair that I was able to step onto to get over that. My students can learn better from me. I can teach better as an instructor. It was just a win-win-win. It really was life-changing for something that seems so minute and small. It's
Angelina, I think that is some of the most powerful information, and it's interesting, I was watching Chaz's reaction, as well when you were sharing, around, is it a gender thing, or is it my body language and confidence that I'm putting out? And it may be an either or, and it may be an and both, right? Uh, but I think as women, you know, especially in our industry, dare I say sometimes we feel attacked and unsafe. Not all the time, but sometimes, right? That we start to create this armor to deal with all that, the constant, and it's not necessarily our peers. It may be our peers, but sometimes it's the customers too, and we're getting it from both ends, right? And it's this space of, okay, I have my armor now, and we have to look at how we are reacting and what we're putting out too, as well as hold other people accountable.
Yes, and this is a huge challenge for me because I have female students that come into my class, right? And I know that as even though times have gotten better and things have changed for the better, there are still challenges that they're going to face. And so for me, I really, really struggle with how much I want to tell them to be prepared for and also not have them put up armor and I don't want them to see attacks when there are not attacks, if that makes sense. So I don't want them to be so prepared and ready for an attack that when something that happens that isn't an attack and they treat it as such, that's not good either, right? I want them to go in with an open heart, open eyes, know that there are going to be challenges, but not everybody is trying to attack you, and being able to identify allies versus people who you have to watch yourself around. Those are how do you explain that? How do you transfer that? I don't know how to transfer that knowledge, and that's something that I really really struggle with because I started off with the attitude of like, man, there's so many things that I wish somebody would have told me, so I want to tell you everything that I've gone through, and I want to share my experience so you know what you're up against and you're not going to get caught off guard, and I want to protect you. But in doing so, I do felt that I feel that in the past there are certain students that I gave a perspective that caused them to be a little jaded going in, and that made me sad. I'm like, man, I screwed up. I screwed up really really bad. I shouldn't have done that. And then I've also gone on the other end where I didn't tell them anything, and then they come to me and say like, "Well, this happened," and I'm like, I know I should have told you. I don't like I finding that balance is something that is extremely challenging for me as a female instructor. I want to help them the best I possibly can. And so for me, now where I'm at, and I still don't know what the answer is, or how to navigate
Yeah,
that
you
well, I
do.
just try to say there's
Angelina,
going
you
to be challenges.
Angelina, you do. You do. And I got to call this out. You do know the answer because you just shared the answers. It's you being you, girl. Truly. It is that simple because you're willing and you have been willing and you have actually done the internal work to get you there. There's two choices we all have, right? We can blame everyone else around us and what they said or they did or didn't do to us or for us, fill in the blank. But you haven't done that. You've looked internally, and when you feel something, and this is the beauty of being a woman, isn't it? It's easier for us to go introspection, right? Look internally and ask ourselves, why am I feeling this way? We can choose to live in anger and constantly have our sword in hand and our, shield up and our armor up. But the beauty of being a woman is our vulnerability and our softness, right? And there is a balance between that. But the fact that you're doing the internal work, you're showing them by being you and how you're handling these different situations, right? Because they're sitting there watching you handle these different situations and how you're handling them. I tell everyone more is caught than taught. You're an instructor, your job is to teach. But what your students are learning is what they're catching. Yeah, they're learning the stuff and memorizing stuff for tests. Sure. But what you are teaching them by you just being you, Angelina, that's a lot, girl. And there those girls and young men, not girls, those women and young men are learning from you by watching who you are and how you handle yourself. And you're a champion. You're a champion.
I appreciate that.
And thank you for receiving that. As women, we're not always good. I'm terrible at it.
I
Chaz has
had to work
challenged
on
me on
that.
that. I'm with you. I'm with you. I not deflecting, but actually receiving the compliment. And I'm not blowing smoke up your rear end here. I've observed you. I am an observer of people. It fascinates me. And you are giving more back to these men and women than you even know simply because you're willing to look internally and understand that rather than just placing blame on people.
Thank you. And I will say, you bring up something that in my journey in trying to be okay with being myself around students, there have been situations where things have happened in class. Student has said something that was inappropriate or rude toward gender, and unfortunately, and you know, we all have flaws. We all have those moments where we don't do exactly what we wish we should have. And I will say, you know, even at the high school, even here, in my early years teaching here, there are things that happened, and I know I had one or two female students watching, and I didn't do exactly what I had wanted, and I was weak in that situation, and that made me even more mad because I needed to be strong for them, and I wasn't, because I didn't know what to say, you know. And the first time a male student said, you know, oh, you need a man to help you out with that, my first initial response in my head was way too inappropriate to say out loud, because in a shop environment, I could say
You
whatever
could
I
let it
want.
fly.
As an instructor, I can't. I'm held to a different standard, and it's not fair because they're not, right? Like, and so I can choose to either be super sensitive about it, make a big deal, kick them out of class, this and that. But I already know what that's going to do. That's going to say, oh, look, she's so overly said she can't take a joke, this, that. And I couldn't say something inappropriate. I was stuck. I was deer in the headlights, and I just shook my head and I continued to work, and I was so disappointed in myself. You know, I had two female students who were watching
What do
something
you
like
wanna
that
tell them
happen.
right now? If you could go
I
back
still
and
don't know
say
what the
if you could go back and say, "You know what? This is how I would have handled that." How would you have handled it differently?
so I mean, now these are things that I've learned, but now a student says something like that, because it's happened more than once, especially in my earlier years, um, I'd say, yeah, sure. Do you see one around here? Because I don't. You know, saying, oh, do you need a man around here? Because that's something that's not inappropriate and is equally as offensive, you know? So that's it. It takes time to build these types of reactions. And you know what?
Comebacks.
Thank you. One thing I would say is you're not always going to have a comeback, and that's okay. You can just shake your head, and they are going to continue to live their life, and maybe one day they'll learn. Maybe one day you'll be able to have the wit at that moment where you're going to have something back to say. There are times where I've had, ooh, such smooth comebacks. I wish it was recorded. And then there are other times where I was deer in the headlights and I didn't have anything to say. And you know what? We're human. That's going to happen. That's what I would say.
Awesome.
Because I had a hard time forgiving myself for that. You know, a really, really hard time forgiving myself for that.
Well, you are forgiven, sister, because now you have taken that lesson from that moment, and thousands of people are going to be able to hear that lesson and learn from it. I wanna pivot just a little bit as we wrap this up. Um, and that pivot is we have talked a lot about your experience as an instructor for sure. But there's a quote. We've asked all of our experts to take a peek at our blog posts, and there's quotes that we have woven into throughout our entire blog post series. But these are actual quotes that I collected from private Facebook groups. It's anonymous, where I asked them to share what are some experience. I asked for positive and challenging experiences that they've had, and we've shared some of those quotes. Now, Chaz is going to read the quote that you chose for your particular week that caught your attention, which I kind of had an internal in my mind bet on which one you'd pick, and I thought it would be that one, that it would just kind of like really like get in there with you. But Chaz, would you mind reading that quote? And then Angelina, I would love to get your take on it because it's so far we've talked about your responses and how other people have reacted to you as a woman, um, around assumed ignorance in your experiences. But now, what I'd like to do is kind of shift gears a little bit. And then I think there's a lesson to be learned by instructors as well. right? Particularly male instructors in this industry. And, you know, there's some not so warm and fuzzy sides of it. And we need to address those and shine light on it because the only way to remove darkness is with light. So we have to put some light on this stuff. So, Chaz, do you want to go ahead and read that quote and then we'll give Angelina an opportunity to respond to it?
So the quote came from a 26-year-old from Michigan. And she said, "My paint instructor in college told me I'll never be able to paint well or get anywhere in the industry because I'm female. I busted my ass, qualified for Skills USA Nationals twice, and came back with silver in post secondary refinish my second year. I've since had 2 jobs as the only painter." His words pushed me to prove him wrong. An instructor certainly should not be saying things like that.
What was
So
your initial reaction when you read that? Like, just knee-jerk
it
reaction.
it makes me so angry every time I hear something like that. And I can not only
Angelina, I
empathize
have
but
to say this
sympathize.
real quick. And I apologize for interrupting you. I have interviewed a lot of women. I have been in a lot of private Facebook groups, and I am blown away by how many experiences women have like this at their community colleges and technical institutions from their instructors. Their instructors. And it is so disappointing to me that the instructors that this is allowed. Like, how does this happen?
I definitely would say it's not allowed, and if their administrators knew anything about it, then bad things would happen. But first thing, just because somebody is an instructor doesn't mean they're all knowing and doesn't mean that they they should be a good example for students, but it doesn't always mean that they are. And who did the hiring, who decided what qualifications that instructor needed or what was good. There are certain people who are cut out for being an instructor and certain people who are not, just like being a mechanic. There are some people who are cut out for it and some people who are not. And as an instructor, it
Just because you're a
is a
mechanic and you know this stuff doesn't mean it makes you a good instructor.
exactly. No, absolutely. Because not everybody's ready for the responsibility. The responsibility of an instructor is so much bigger than sometimes it's given credit for. Sometimes it's put out there. Every single thing we say, every single thing we say could potentially affect somebody for the rest of their life. And that may seem over dramatic, but when you say some shit like that, that's not. It absolutely can affect somebody for the rest of their life in a positive or a negative way. So the best you can try to do is say things that are going to encourage people and hopefully affect them in a good way for the rest of their life rather than in a bad way. And I really hope that, I don't think I've ever said anything to any student that hopefully, made them come home and be like, wow, I'm a piece of crap. And have bad feelings about themselves, because I'm always very, very careful about how I say things. And my goal is always, okay, at the end of this conversation, are they going to come out with a goal? Are they going to come out feeling motivated? Because my goal as an instructor, as any instructor, should never be to demoralize somebody. Never to demoralize somebody. And any instructor who abuses their power and does that, I'm
Ooh.
not a violent person, but no, you might be missing Schrader valves out of your tires one day. I don't know. No, I'm joking. I'm definitely
I know
joking since
you're
this
joking.
is going to go public. No, but seriously, I not only empathize, but I do sympathize with this person because um, I had a really bad instructor at the college level. At actually here at RCC, he no longer is employed because I took his position. But
Ooh, snaps, girl.
be the change you want to see. And
Absolutely.
so this instructor was a self-proclaimed feminist, which that's always really awesome. And I had 4 classes with this instructor, and this instructor, in every single one of those classes that I had to endure from him, would single me out in some point in time during the class, and there were arguments that should have never happened in front of a class, and they did.
What would you tell this girl? We read the quote. This stuff happens regularly, unfortunately. What
Well,
would
and
you tell
actually,
her?
luckily, this young lady was hard headed like you and proved herself in spite of him. But we did have quotes from women, and I've heard of plenty of
They
young
left
women
the
who,
industry.
yeah, they gave up. They were like, I mean, my teacher is telling me I can't do this. Why would I believe I can do this?
Exactly. Exactly. They have that kind of no, you're absolutely right. They as instructors, we have that kind of power. And it with with great power comes great responsibility, right? And so to the instructors out there, just know that every word that comes out of your mouth is powerful, man or woman, right? It is our job to be motivating. We're leaders. You have to act like a leader, and a good leader is going to motivate your group, not demoralize your group or demoralize any of your people. You have to help them rise up, right? So to instructors, you need to respect the power that you yield. Um, from the student perspective, just like what my instructor told me, you're not going to love every one of your instructors. And maybe it's an auto instructor today, maybe it's a health science instructor tomorrow, maybe, it doesn't matter. Just because they're instructors doesn't mean that they're good people. And that they're self-aware of the things that are coming out of their mouth. So if you ever get an instructor that is going to say something that is demoralizing like that, you need to just put them in that box in your head that, okay, they are the ones that I'm going to become successful in spite of. And you get a good instructor and they're going to go in the other box. This one is going to help me be successful because of.
And you got this. You got this. You can do this, girl. You got this. You can do this. You belong there.
To every student, man or woman out there, I can tell you, and I will say especially to the women, I can't tell you how many times I've gone through this phase of maybe this is just not what I'm cut out for. Maybe my brain is too small. Maybe this is why women generally do this and men generally do this. I've had many moments of self-doubt, and then either a friend or my fiance or a mentor of mine I would confide in would say something motivating to me, and it just reminds me the only way I'm going to get past this is by working hard. Nose to the grindstone, get past it, because you're going to get over that hump, and I promise you it's those dark times that right after that light is there. That light is there. And you are going to be like, wow, I'm so glad that I did that. I'm so glad that I pushed through that hard time. I'm so glad, because it makes it that much more fulfilling. It really does. And you know what? It's not going to be the last time you feel shitty like that. You're going to do it again, and then you're going to get better again, and then you're going to feel shitty again, then you're going to get better again, because that's life. But the best thing you can do is do something that you're proud of. And if it's something that you're proud of and you like doing and you're passionate about doing, you're going to have to stick through the hard times, because if it was easy, then everyone would do it.
Spoken like a true expert, my friend. And Angelina,
Yes.
I want to thank you for, again, accepting our invitation. And I you have dropped so many amazing knowledge nuggets in this interview for women and men, women and men, and how to handle assumed ignorance, how to battle the internal demons around what assumed ignorance can do to someone's worth and imposter syndrome and all that. We've hit it all. And I just want to thank you. I've learned a ton. I know, Chaz, I saw light bulbs go off for you as well.
I'm like, you've done such a great job of disproving that assumption. Like, you think women are automatically let me hit you with some knowledge.
Yeah.
It's been fabulous.
I am super excited to work with you on hopefully some future projects. I know that you've worked with Bogey on some of the builds. I do different types of projects than car builds. We do projects like this where it's creating those platforms for women, platform for women to speak and to educate. And I hope that we can work on a project like that again very soon. And I'm curious because if other people are watching this, are you in your classroom right now? Is that where you're filming this
I'm in
from?
my classroom right now. Yeah.
That's awesome. You can see, is that that's a rear end behind you,
I've
right?
got a differential back here. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, that's what I thought. I figured I might as well address it because there may be some people watching like, "Oh, is she in her classroom or is that?" And yes, that is a differential behind her. And but
That's my classroom and my second home because I pretty much live here most of the time.
the honor has been ours, my friend, and we will be in touch and hopefully our paths will cross soon again very shortly.
I thank you so much again for including me in this. I love every single conversation we get to have. I definitely look forward to working with you on future projects. So thank you so much again.
Thanks for watching. By being open to learning more about these topics, you are fueling a movement that creates a safer and more inclusive environment for women in our industry. And for that, we thank you. It's up to all of us to keep this conversation alive. The only way to rid the industry of the darkness is to shine light on it. The entire 5-part blog series of the dirty little secrets of the automotive and skilled trades industries can be found on ChasidyraySisk.com and Femcanic.com. Until next time, my friends.